We can talk about.
I honestly don't know, because it's on the maps, you know.
Yeah.
That was Bartholomew. Whether it was changed in the 30s when Father Markey, you know, did the arrangement. Welcome to Ballinalee on a December morning. The week 100 years ago, this very week, the village of Ballinalee, many of the shops in the village of Ballinalee were burned by the Black and Tans. And we're standing, I'll burn to myself, we're standing outside Farrels Shop here. And 100 years ago, Farrels Shop was the site of the RIC barracks, or rather a site that they had commandeered, the Black and Tans had commandeered this barracks because the previous one had been destroyed. So there was about 35, was it around 35?
I think the garrison was 35.
About 35 in the garrison, in the barracks here.
I think after the Battle of Ballinalee on the 3rd, night of the 3rd and the morning of the 4th of November, the North Longford Flying Column and members of the volunteers garrisoned the town for approximately 3 weeks. In the aftermath of that, they went up to Ardegullion on the main Edgeworthstown Granard Road to try and entice the Tans into action up there. However, when they left Ballinalee, the Tans arrived en masse in the village and, as I said, took over this building among others. And that was the background to the actual battle that occurred here by members of the volunteers. So I suppose if we go inside, we can get a better look maybe at what happened there.
So the events took place, I think it was around the 13th of December in 1920. So we're at the side of the commandeered barracks here. And interesting enough, Pádraig, or Bernard, your grandfather was involved.
He was actually here, yes. He was actually across the street under Frank Davis. And what had happened was they had put many of the volunteers on the routes approaching Ballinalee as backup. Sean McKeown had a party at the rear here, and Sean McKeown and Sean Duffy actually laid the mine. Now, Sean Duffy, from witness statements, it was a 56-pound mine, which is about 25 kilograms, and he carried it in his bare feet. At the time, the weather is said to be something similar to now. There had been snow on the ground. So he carried the mine and laid it on this sill here. They ran the cables over to Kiernan's sheds here behind us, and Barney Kilbride, who was engineer of the battalion, actually exploded the mine. And the mine actually, you can see, this was one of the shutters on the window, which it actually blew off. Fire was opened up then by a party in the rear and the party across the street. I believe it was a late night attack, 11 or 12 at night, and it continued to about 7 a.m. The Tans inside were actually playing the piano at times to give themselves, to gee them up as it were. And
possibly using the provisions from Farrels Shop that they had commandeered. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, so after that, in the early morning, they withdrew because they weren't going to move them from the premises, they realised, and they went back to their billets in Drumeil, in Kiernan's Drumeil and around Corrigranny and places like that. The Tans did subsequently vacate the premises the next day.
The Tans, of course, sustained some, well, there was one fatality, Constable Taylor, and then there were a number of injuries. But it's fascinating to think that Pádraig Farrell, Pádraig, the proprietor here of the shop, it was his grandfather's premises, and Bernard, as I say, your grandfather involved in the attack on the barracks. So this is real living history from Ballinalee here, this piece of metal. So now we'll move now to following that attack on the barracks. A number of the buildings in the village at the other end of the village were destroyed, but also to Bernard has mentioned earlier, Kiernan's premises here just beside us, and that was destroyed also by fire by the Black and Tans. Yeah. And this is just Kiernan's premises. I think this might have been the post office, Bernard.
Maybe, yes.
At the time, and that was destroyed by fire. Effectively, you were moving from the original barracks was probably at the site of the.
It was on the corner, I believe.
The corner, yeah, where the barracks closed some years ago. So then they moved to here, and then they moved to. They moved probably to the school. Perfect. So now, Bernard, we go to the other end of the village to look at the shops that were burned. Yeah. Of course, Bernard, here we have Rose Cottage.
Rose Cottage, yes.
There's a lot of construction work going on around it at the moment, but that was the scene, of course, of the Battle of Ballinalee.
That was the
month
headquarters.
Earlier.
Yes, exactly. So that was McKeown's headquarters when the Tans actually came in from Granard and turned down this road.
Yeah.
And head for Ballinalee. So this is where McKeown and his party of 4 others were actually based when they came out. And the Tans had lined up down along here in 11 trucks, down from Heritage right back up. And the men came out to the centre of the crossroads here, firing at them from about 20 yards to the back of the last truck. So, and then of course we have the Stag's Head across the road.
Yeah, across the road, the Stag's Head, which is the Reynolds, owned by Reynolds. In fact,
this was Reynolds
was also Reynolds. And it was commandeered as well by the Crown Forces at this, just after Farrels.
After Farrels, I think, yeah. And they had the schoolhouse as well.
And the schoolhouse up the road as well, on the Granard Road.
Yeah.
And again, it was burned as well.
Yeah.
At a later stage, in 1921, I think it was.
Yeah. Because I think this is obviously for Clonfin. It was the garrison in this town that were the reinforcements that went to Clonfin in the aftermath as well. So, because I know in some of them I think there was 35 in Farrels and there was about 25 in the schoolhouse. So there was a very large combination of forces here at that time. So obviously they knew they had to be strong to repel the amount of volunteers there was too.
Now we're heading next down to the bottom of the village where a number of premises were burned after the attack on Farrels.
Yeah. Where were the cottages that were actually burnt now?
Yeah, just right here, just across from us. We had Miss Hannigan's on the left. It's now called Boylan's. Miss Hannigan's, and she had a sweet shop, I think it was. And then right beside her was Early's leather goods, and both of those were burned, and all the outhouses and so on destroyed at this time.
And there was another Hannigan's as well, was there? Another Hannigan's burned.
Just further, yeah.
And there was Brackens or something.
Brackens was just down here, yeah. Now the church would have been, that's our church built in 1947. Now the church wasn't touched, of course, at this period, but it would have been on a lower level, just across from Heritage. Now the other main premise, I suppose one of the main premises to be destroyed by the Blackatans was PJ Herity's premises here, which was a very substantial premises. A hardware store, he was an undertaker, a publican, so all the stock, just the buildings, the stock, the outhouses, etc. were all destroyed. In fact, I was reading where the compensation claim there was quite enormous for the period of £9,000. I don't know how much
the beatings it is,
at the end. But the Herity family owned that pub until about possibly 20 years ago. And they're still in the village. And of course, other families that are still, the Farrels of course are still in the village as well. And they were part of that night. And a number of other families were there. Now, now down here, just across from Herity's store, we had Bracken's house and farmyard. And again, Bracken's, it later on became Horricans. But it was all destroyed, and the stock, some of the stock were just destroyed. The haggards and so on destroyed as well. In fact, we're now coming up to the Camlin, Camlin River. And the last premises to be destroyed was another Hannigan house. And the Hannigan family, in fact, lived there until about 20 years ago. It's now owned by the Tully family, and the family has died out locally. But again, they're a very substantial house, all the haggards around it, everything destroyed. So that was just beside the Camlin River. So of course there were other premises burned later, Bernard.
There was, like, after the major battle here in Ballinalee and the attack on Farrels and the burnings, the Tans then moved out into the countryside, and obviously knowing who the leaders of the flying column and the volunteers in the area, they targeted Sean Duffy's house in Cavan, in the townland of Cavan. They then moved on to Sean Connolly's house, his home place, and they burned his house and his haggard and shot his livestock, and then they burned McKeown's forge as well. So they really were wreaking revenge for the events that had happened right from, we'd say, early November right through into December and towards Christmas. As a consequence, and because the people of Ballinalee had suffered so much, the North Longford Flying Column then took the decision to move out of the area and to try and relieve the pressure and move to South Longford in the early part of 1921. One of the events down there was the Turlickin ambush in January of 1921, and that was also seen as a way of trying to get the South Longford volunteers active and setting up a flying column down there. But the people of Ballinalee had seen enough and endured enough, certainly in the latter portion of 1920.
Yeah, and there's a very good description, which I'm just going to quote, from the newspaper. Now, about 2 months later, in February, the Longford Leader has an interesting paragraph. And I quote, "In the course of an unforced journey, the writer visited Ballinalee on Wednesday last, which was the market day for the village. In the vicinity of the village, the awful change that has taken place in the once prosperous hamlet is noticeable. There are no farming operations or spring work in progress. The fields are deserted, and you meet neither pedestrians or traffic on the roads. A sense of desolation is at once experienced as you approach the unhappy hamlet." In Ballinalee village, however, the greatest change has taken place because the village as such has ceased to exist. The north side of the village has been completely wiped out, and most of the inhabitants in the end have removed themselves and their belongings to more congenial surroundings. And we're told that of the 38 families in the village at the start of December, there were only 2 families left in March, on the 1st of March. So really, as we're in a peaceful surroundings this morning in Ballinalee, but I think it's important to remember those events of 100 years ago in early December 1920.